Okay, pen at the ready. Time for the Georges. I'll make a different video, a separate one, about how the Hanoverians came to the throne, because it involves the Stuarts and there's a little bit more to it. But this one's just about the Georges. So we start with George I, who came to the throne in 1714 when Anne died. Now, George was off visiting Hanover one day. He was on his way there when he had a stroke and he died. But it was okay because he had a son and heir, and he was called George, and he became George II. And George II had a son, and guess what he was called? Yeah, he wasn't called George, he was called Frederick. And Frederick wasn't allowed to come to the throne because he wasn't called George. That was a joke, by the way. He died, he was hit in the chest by a tennis ball, they were harder then, or a cricket ball, and he died of complications of that. But it was okay because he had a son and he was called George, and he came to the throne as George III. That's why George III had such a long reign, because he came as a young man, his father having not been on the throne. George III had a son, and guess what he was called? Yeah, he was called George, and he was George IV. He was Prince Regent for a while when his dad went mad, but he came to the throne and had 10 years in his own right. Now, George IV had a daughter called Charlotte, but Charlotte, sadly, it was sad. She had died in childbirth, and the boy didn't survive either. So there was no heir from George IV, and so the throne went to his brother, and his brother was called William. Now, William had been around the world a bit, sailing. He didn't come to the throne until he was in his 60s, and he didn't have any children, any legitimate children. So where were they going to go next? Well, there was this big scrabble among the family to try and provide an heir, but there was one. They also had another brother who had been called Edward, the Duke of Kent, but Edward had died not before having a daughter, and she was called Alexandrina. Alexandrina came to the throne as Queen Victoria. Now, Queen Victoria, we've done what, 1, 2, 3, 4 Georges, so there's 2 more to go. Queen Victoria had a son. He became Edward the Seventh. Let's get that right. He had a son, and here's the next George. He was George V, and George V had a son, and he became Edward the Eighth. I'm just doing it in this direction to get it back on camera. There we go. Edward the Eighth abdicated. Didn't last long, but he ended up going, and his brother Albert became king, but he became George VI. And then we have Elizabeth II. There we go. And I still find it hard to say and write Charles III. So there you go, there's all the Georges, and there could be another one because William has a son and he's called George.